Okay, I woke up way earlier than I should be waking up. I usually sleep about 8 hours, but I couldn't sleep anymore. I thought I didn't make a video, and so maybe if I make a video, my hair's all wild because I just woke up, take a shower in the morning like a normal American, unlike Japanese. If I take a shower before I go to bed, my hair is even more wild. I gotta really take a shower in the morning. Anyway, when my wife comes from Japan, I'll probably take a shower both morning and afternoon, and morning and evening, because she won't want to sleep with me if I don't take a shower before I go to bed. Then I'll have to really take a shower in the morning because then my hair will be all fucked up. Anyway, that fan is loud. Sorry, let me turn that shit off. Okay, so I wanted to make um, a video about infallibility. I don't believe in anyone being infallible. So some fundamentalist Buddhists think that all the sutras are the golden words of the Buddha and they're all infallible. Well, first of all, none of them were written by the Buddha. Shakyamuni, otherwise known as Siddhartha, otherwise known as Gautama. They were all written hundreds of years after he died, maybe 100 years or more. So the fact, if you think the sutras are all infallible, then what you're saying is all the monks and people that memorized his teachings were also infallible. So they were all perfectly pure and perfectly enlightened because they were the ones who actually for 100 years or more had to memorize his teachings and then pass them down orally until they created a language called Sanskrit to write them down. So that's a really, really fundamentalist idea based on people who think like fundamentalist Christians that the word in the Bible, even though it takes on teachings based on a bunch of people's hearsay and what they heard from someone or didn't hear from someone and what they thought they saw, that somehow that's the golden word of God or something. I don't believe in God, but for people who believe in God, that's a fundamentalist idea that every single word in some book that's been totally taken out of context, that was written by a whole host of authors that we don't have all their extended writing because the Roman Church burned down libraries and destroyed people who didn't practice their exact Catholic, which means orthodox teaching. Anyway, that's the same with Buddhist sutras. Even the historical Buddha, if he did write them down, he said, in the beginning, I taught teachings that were what were going to be in the Lotus Sutra in the last 8 years of his life, but no one understood those teachings and they actually rebelled against them. So I realized for 40-something years I had to teach teachings that weren't the teachings I wanted to teach in the final teachings because people weren't ready for those final teachings. So if he even says in the sutras that I made a mistake by trying to teach the final teachings at the beginning and realized no one was ready, and they're probably not even going to be ready for another 3,000 years after I die, which he said in the final teachings, shows that he's not infallible. And if you take, yes, I read the 1,000-something pages in Volume 1 and the 1,000-something pages in Volume 2 of the writings of Nichiren Daishonin, where he even says on Sado Island, consider everything I wrote before Sado Island as my expedient means teaching, which means it's not his perfectly refined teachings that he's going to teach later on. And he said in his last, towards the end of his life, that he finally revealed the truth. And I believe that's some of the writings that I read on my previous videos, which was what he was actually referring to, the culmination of all of his life work. Not some diamond dollar, which he never wrote about and he never created. That was created by the ninth high priest of Nichiren Joshu. This idea that there's some Gohonzon that's better than other Gohonzons. Okay, so also I consider Daisaku Ikeda my mentor. Does that mean he's infallible? No. And I'm so glad that Daisaku Ikeda, that the first president and the second president of the Soka Gakkai also were not infallible, because they believed this myth that there was some great Gohonzon that was better than all other Gohonzons, and this Gohonzon was somehow created on a wooden block, even though um, the all the writings of Nichiren say that he inscribed his life in sumi, which is the ink that they used back in then, which is from an eel, I think, or an octopus or something, I can't remember. But anyway, I'm a little tired, as you can tell. I need to go back to bed. But Daisaku Ikeda is not infallible. This idea when the high priest of Nichiren Shoshu was trying to excommunicate or trying to dethrone or bring down from our honorific title as mentor in life in the Soka Gakkai, our mentor Daisaku Ikeda, and people were going, we need to talk about anyone could be infallible, even the high priest, and so could the Soka Gakkai be infallible. There's no such thing as, sorry, no one's infallible. That's what I'm trying to say. Everyone's fallible, if that's a word. Everyone's able to make mistakes, and that's not a sign that you're not a Buddha because you made a mistake. Being a Buddha is not a fixed destination where you never can ever make a mistake. And then again, there's no mistake, because mistake and unmistake are just definitions based on limitations of language. So what if, I want to give you guys another little teaching I learned from Access Consciousness. What if your point of view creates your reality, not the other way around? So if you have the point of view that something is something, what if that creates it as being that because of your projections, your expectations, your judgments, your conclusions about that fixed point of view? And what if reality on a whole is created by everyone's projections, expectations, judgments, conclusions about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, and it all is a point of view that is all limited, and there is no exact reality. Reality is just the negative and positive polarity of people's alignment and agreement and resistance reacting to different point of views that either work for you or work against you. And every teaching, whether it's a Buddhist teaching or another teaching, can work for you or work against you. Like, I think of Martin Luther King as one of the greatest Christians, because he actually showed how the teachings of Christianity can work for people to free them from cultural enslavement to some patriarchal and some racist system called America, and how they can use those teachings to step out of that, calling themselves God's children, even though I don't believe in God, or I don't believe in God. If there were a God, he would have children. But because you can use beliefs, any beliefs, to work for you or work against you, he used them to work for him to free a lot of people from cultural slavery to what he called the three fundamental evils. In Buddhism, we say greed, anger, and ignorance. Well, those are just points of view. I agree with those point of view. I align and agree with them because, I can disagree with them too, but it doesn't make me un-Buddhist because I disagree with some Buddhist concept or idea, because they're all just limitations. All beliefs are limitations, according to Access Consciousness, which is another form of the highest teachings of Buddhism, according to my thorough calculations and research, as if calculating and researching isn't a limitation, because that's a fixation on a finite reality that is always expanding. The reason I got these bubbles here is to realize that everything you see is just a figment of your imagination, and everything you experience in life is just a bunch of patterns of organic energy that you can choose to be fixated on one form of that reality and say this is the only way it's got to be, and be a fundamentalist about any set of beliefs, whether they're Buddhist or whether they're another religion. It's all limitation if you believe it's infallible. This is the exact way it has to be, and there can be no other way, and if you don't do it this way, then you're going to go to the sixth heaven with the in the fundamental zone of fundamental darkness with the fucking Dragon King's daughter or something. Okay, I took a drink there to get my word out. I'm going to go back to bed. But I just want to say that Nichiren wasn't infallible. Shakyamuni wasn't infallible. Just because someone's a Buddha and claiming, owning, and acknowledging that they're a Buddha, and being, knowing, perceiving, and receiving that they're a Buddha, like I do, doesn't mean I'm infallible. Doesn't mean I'm any better than anyone listening to this, because there is no distinctions in Buddhism. That's why he said, I made a vow to make all people equal to me with no distinctions. Distinctions are this idea that you have the one and only way, and there's no other way besides that way. That's a judgment. That's a conclusion based on a fixated point of view that is neither right or wrong. It's just either works for you or works against you. And so what teachings are you using to work against you, and what teachings could you be using to work for you, so you didn't have to fuck yourself out of being an infinite being from time without beginning that you truly have always been and you always will be, and you can't ever not be, if you're willing to realize that you can be fallible, like me. You can make videos half naked when you're half asleep and still not worry about being right or wrong, good or bad, judgmental. So I can follow my mentor in life, even though I've had issues with certain things he said many times. Like for all the years before Fukushima, I would read things that Daisaku Ikeda would write, even the dialogue about the nuclear. I read the dialogue, I can't remember what it's called now, and I had a real issue with the fact that in that whole dialogue they didn't say anything about against nuclear power, which you can't be against nuclear weapons without being against nuclear power, because nuclear weapons are created by the products of nuclear power, and nuclear power was always a lie to be able to create nuclear byproducts that would be able to be used in nuclear bombs. So all the nuclear reactors in Japan, which were hundreds of them, and all the nuclear reactors around the world, they're not cost effective. They're not in any way beneficial to the societies that had them. They were all an excuse to make nuclear weapons for the U.S. when GE was put all these nuclear power plants in Japan and all around the world. So when I was reading back in the 90s and 80s, everything Daisaku Ikeda was saying about nuclear weapons, but he wasn't focusing on the destructiveness of nuclear power. And I was saying that you cannot be against nuclear power, be against nuclear weapons if you're not against nuclear power. And finally, after Fukushima, Daisaku Ikeda wrote a long thing against nuclear power for the first time ever. And I've read all the things he's ever written about nuclear weapons. And I was always saying it was completely unrealistic to fight nuclear weapons without fighting nuclear power. So I'm finally glad my mentor in life has woke up and smelled the coffee with Fukushima. So does that mean I'm not going to follow all of his guidance, and that I don't think his guidance is great, and I don't think he's my mentor because he didn't realize that nuclear power was just as bad as nuclear weapons, and you can't accept one or the other. They both go hand in hand, because nuclear power plants create the byproducts that create nuclear weapons. And the only reason why the U.S. was able to create so many nuclear weapons is because they pushed countries to have nuclear power plants. And this Atoms for Peace deal was you can have our power plants as long as we get material that's left over so we can make nuclear bombs. That's what it was all about. It was all a fraud. And now that Fukushima's happened, even in Niigata, where my wife lives, where I lived for a long time, there was some nuclear meltdowns and some, not complete meltdowns, but there was leaks in their Kashiwazaki power plants, which were 10 times as big as Chernobyl. There was 10 of them there. Those, if they weren't shut down, and they're probably going to be reactivated because people never learned the lesson of stupidity, that they bought into this lie that nuclear power is somehow cheap and clean, and it's not cheap and clean. And it's actually the most expensive form of power in the world, because you'll never get rid of the leftover byproducts unless you create nuclear bombs and you drop them on countries like we did to many countries. I shouldn't say thousands. We did it on Iran, Iraq. We've used depleted uranium on Yugoslavia. We've used it on other countries, which I don't have to go into because you can read the history of that. But anyway, so not only did we drop the A-bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but we used depleted uranium throughout many of the wars we waged that we didn't call wars, on countries that we shouldn't have been fighting, because war is the fundamental darkness that is the greatest form of terrorism that creates terrorism. So you can't have a war on terrorism and a war on nuclear bombs if you don't have a war on nuclear power plants. Okay, anyway, I'm going in a tangent circle. But anyway, this video is about, is anyone infallible? No. I'm not infallible. My mentor Daisaku Ikeda is not infallible. All the high priests of Nichiren Shoshu were not infallible, obviously, because they were stupid asses and they tried to excommunicate all the Gakkai members, and realized probably by now that they're pretty stupid for doing that, because they're going downhill fast because they have no great amount of followers to pump money into their coffers, which was what we did as SGI for many years, stupidly, because we're not infallible. We do stupid things. We follow stupid people sometimes. So what? We learn from our mistakes. We move on. So I'm so glad that if we didn't have these instances where Daisaku Ikeda, Josei Toda, Tsunesuburo Makiguchi followed the high priest of some sect that is not infallible, obviously, and who has this strange concept that one Gohonzon was greater than another Gohonzon, which has no historical documentary proof based on the writings of Nichiren Daishonin, and never did. Only the first person who wrote about it was the ninth high priest, probably invented the idea that because we have this big wooden one we put at Taisekuji, that somehow we're better than all the other temples that aren't in Nichiren Shoshu, that are other Nichiren sects that all amalgamated into one sect called Nichiren Shu, which was a government-created propaganda machine. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that because you already saw that video and a lot of people disliked that one, and I shocked a lot of people by speaking the truth. Anyway, I'm going to go back to bed. I just wanted to say Nichiren isn't infallible. Shakyamuni isn't infallible. Daisaku Ikeda isn't infallible. I'm definitely fucking not infallible. And no high priest has ever been infallible. So if you're a fundamentalist and you believe every single word of the sutras is the golden word of the Buddha, and every single word in the Gosho is absolutely fundamentally perfect and correct, and you are practicing some form of Buddhism that doesn't exist, because the only thing that's true is what's inside of you, which is you are the treasure tower, and you can't seek the Gohonzon outside of yourself, which is not seeking the law outside of yourself in someone else's doctrines and someone else's ideas. You can gain a lot of truth from all those, and you can use them for you or against you. That's your choice. But anyway, no one's infallible. I'm definitely not. Okay, I love you all. Peace out.